During October of 2023, while in Spartanburg, South Carolina for my husband's high school reunion, we decided to take our kids to Blackstock Battlefield. Ironically, my husband's alma mater happened to be the Cavaliers, and the Battle of Blackstock, which occurred in the neighboring county, resulted in the devastating defeat of Tartlton's mounted forces. While my husband and I had previously made a trip to Blackstock Battlefield earlier during the year, we decided this time, rather than just look at the battlefield, we wanted to take our children on their first hike of the Palmetto Trail. During this vlog, I will share footage from both trips, as well as talk about the battle and the trail. By October of 1780, those South Carolina locals loyal to the crown were still reeling from the stinging defeat at Kings Mountain. After the Patriot victory at Kings Mountain, Cornwallis left Charlotte, North Carolina, and went to spend the winter in Winnsboro, South Carolina. During this time, the British controlled South Carolina in areas like Georgetown, Charlestown, Camden, and 96. In addition, Cornwallis had other small garrisons and outposts throughout South Carolina. It was also during this time, instead of continuing the pursuit of the elusive Swamp Fox, Cornwallis ordered bloody Bannister Tartlton to come to the upcountry and pursue the Gamecock, General Thomas Sumter and his patriots. While Francis Marion continued to disrupt supply lines and make things difficult in the Low Country, Cornwallis was being plagued by Sumter. Sumter was attacking British grist mills and outposts near 96 between the Enoree and Tiger Rivers. In addition, Cornwallis was at a loss because of Sumter's victory over the 63rd British Mounted Infantry and Dragoons at Fish Dam Ford. Tartlton, while an outstanding cavalry officer, had earned his nickname due to his lack of empathy and by allowing his men to act in the most unhonorable fashions to both patriots and loyalists alike. On the other hand, the Virginian Thomas Sumter was also an outstanding commander. He had earned his chops in the French and Indian War and in the conflict against the Cherokee on the frontier. However, it was during the Revolutionary War that Sumter earned his nickname, in part because he was hard to work with and also because of his strong resolve and aggressive fighting style. Interestingly, prior to the Revolutionary War, Sumter spent some time in debtor's prison before being released and marrying a widow. He then established his successful High Hills plantation on the Santee River in South Carolina, which by the time of the Battle of Blackstock had already been burned to the ground by Tartlton. While Tartlton and Sumter would fight against each other, they did share some similarities in that they were both staunch supporters of slavery, great leaders, had enormous egos, had already made a name for themselves, and both had missed the Battle of Kings Mountain, the latter of which was due to Tartlton being in Kingstree searching for Marion and Sumter being in North Carolina politicking and trying to get command of more militiamen. On the contrary, another key difference between Tartlton and Sumter was that Sumter led South Carolina men who were untrained farmers and hunters, whereas Tartlton led his legion, which was around 300 infantry and 200 mounted men, consisting of his green coat-wearing loyalist American partisans. These partisans were from New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, and while being American, were trained up as professional soldiers. In addition, during this time, Tartlton also commanded the red uniformed light companies of the British Army in the South, a detachment of professional soldiers from the 16th Light Dragoons, and what was left of the 63rd Regiment after the Battle of Fish Creek Dam. Besides having command over superiorly trained men, Tarleton's Legion also had a 3-pounder grasshopper gun. One important side note about Tarleton's men is that the 63rd Regiment was led by Lieutenant Money. Money was a young man on Cornwallis's staff, though you should know he thought of him more as a son. Money was handpicked by Cornwallis to command the 63rd. This occurred after the regiment's original leader failed by refusing to allow the 63rd to dismount in a night attack during the Fish Creek Dam debacle. The new leader, Lieutenant Money, had much potential as he had been trained and brought up by Cornwallis. In addition, the upcoming battle at Blackstock Plantation would be the 23-year-old Money's first field command. As a result, sometime prior to the battle, Cornwallis had correspondence sent to Money, reminding him of the importance of having his 63rd Mounted Infantry dismount before engaging the enemy. Fortunately for Sumter, while Tartlton did have a superior force, by the end of November of 1780, for various reasons, including the Patriot victory at Kings Mountain and Fish Creek Dam, the support for the cause of liberty increased, and Sumter found himself 1,000 men strong. Upon entering South Carolina and going to see Cornwallis, Tartlton wanted to keep the element of surprise, so he had his green coat-wearing dragoons remove their jackets. Unfortunately for Tartlton, his plan did not succeed, as during the night one of the men from the 63rd deserted and went straight to Sumter to warn him that Tartlton was in the area. After Sumter learned of Tarleton's new orders and his pursuit, Sumter decided to start a slow retreat so that he could gather up his raiding parties and find a strong defensive position to make a stand. Interestingly, when Sumter arrived to the plantation, Mr. Blackstock was gone, possibly serving as a patriot elsewhere. In addition, upon Sumter's arrival, I have heard it said that Mrs. Blackstock got into his face and ordered him to leave her property. Mrs. Blackstock may have done this as she knew what to expect, as the Blackstock barn had previously been used as a fort while fighting the indigenous warriors. En route to the Blackstock home, Sumter had left his rear guard commanded by Patty Carr at the Jones River to keep an eye out for Tartlton and his men. It is documented while at this location, some loyalists were being held as prisoners. It is unclear to me why the prisoners were left with Carr, or if Carr's party just happened to capture them while waiting for Tartlton. Regardless, by midday there are differing accounts of what occurred. According to Carr, only the POWs were killed. But according to Tartlton, Sumter's left guard was hacked to pieces. Personally, I believe when Carr and his men spotted Tartlton, due to fear, Carr had the prisoners released so that he and his men could make a faster getaway into the woods, after which possibly a few of Carr's men were killed and all of the British supporting prisoners were slaughtered. After this encounter, Tartlton realized he needed to move much faster to catch up with Sumter. So, being the brash commander that he was, he ordered 300 of his mounted dragoons and the mounted 63rd to follow him and left his infantry and cannon behind. However, unbeknownst to Tartlton, a local woman named Mary Deal was watching and listening. Upon learning of Tarleton's intentions, Mary scurried away and mounted her horse. Being a local, she knew a shortcut to the Blackstock plantation and quickly arrived there with the message that Tartlton and his mounted forces were headed straight for Sumter. As Sumter considered this new information, he looked at the plantation's landscape, which included the Blackstock's house and log-built barns and outbuildings to provide cover. In addition, he noticed that the farm was situated on a sharp hill with 50 acres of pasture that sloped down to a shallow stream in the farm's fields. Behind the house, the land pitched sharply to the fast-running Tiger River on the north and the northeast side of the property. About 200 yards to the right of the house was a long ridge covered with a thick growth of hardwood and pine. However, most importantly, to the left, in front of the outbuildings, at the top of the pasture was a strong railed fence, about 1/4 of a mile long, made of heavy notch saplings, which formed a single lane leading to the house. In addition, the Blackstock family had other fences on the property to keep cattle away from their crops. And because of this, it would cause Tartlton to only have one point of entry. Sumter decided to ignore the pleading of Mrs. Blackstock, as this was a perfect place to make a stand. While awaiting Tartlton, Sumter stood atop the hill, watching his men on the field, making camp and cooking. Between 1 and 4 o'clock, Sumter's man, Colonel Taylor, and his foraging party were making their way toward the Blackstock plantation with flour for the men. Taylor and his men were almost at the plantation's property when suddenly they found Tartlton and his mounted men hot on their heels. As Taylor and his men began a furious gallop towards the plantation, the sound of gunfire rang out as Sumter's pickets at the end of Blackstock Lane on top of the opposing ridge with tremendous effort took aim at the British beyond Taylor and his party. I have even heard it said that as Taylor crossed over some logs that were laid in the swampy bottoms near the plantation, clouds of flour bellowed out of the side of his wagon. Upon reaching the top of the opposing ridge, 400 yards away from the Blackstock home, Tartlton stopped and watched in delight as Taylor's foraging party, the picket men, and the patriots fled the field back toward Sumter in fear. Tartlton, who had yet to lose a fight, was always looking to flex his military muscle. He had a reputation for charging in with a much smaller force and hacking the enemy to death until they fled and he seized victory. In fact, that is exactly what he had done to win the victory at the Battle of Fishing Creek and the Waxhaws. But to everyone's surprise, Tartlton halted. Indeed, Tartlton too noticed the formidable slope of the landscape, the fences, and the buildings. While Tartlton studied law in college and not military history or strategy, Tartlton was not a dumb man and decided it was worth waiting for his infantry and the grasshopper. Sumter was taken back by this and made his next move by spreading out his men and enticing conflict. In response, Lieutenant Money and his 63rd Regiment of foot soldiers dismounted in case of attack. After which Sumter realized he could not wait until Tarleton's infantry and the Grasshopper arrived. He would have to initiate the engagement. In an effort to antagonize the enemy, Sumter gathered a little over 100 volunteers to go within 200 yards of the 63rd's position and fire upon them. Around this time, Sumter ordered Colonel Lacey and his men, who were positioned at the woodline on what is today known as Monument Hill, to use stealth and the dense woods to surprise the Legion dragoons on the ridge. In addition, Sumter sent word to Elijah Clark and his militia to sneak around the left side of the British by way of the Tiger River and position themselves behind the 63rd. An interesting side note, of Elijah Clark's men, there was William Hodge. It is written that Hodge joined with Elijah Clark and Colonel Banner Boone after Sumter's triumph at Fish Dam. However, Hodge and Clark knew each other much earlier than that, as they came to the Carolinas from Virginia with each other. When Lacey and his men were in position within 30 yards of Tarleton's dragoons, they shot down several men and horses, after which Lacey and most of his men retreated back to what today is known as Monument Hill, while some did stay in the dense woods throughout the entire fight. Lieutenant Money, as a good officer or as ordered by Tarleton, decided to advance the 63rd from their position down the ridge. This was done in the hopes that the mere sight of the British bayonet would cause the common patriot militiaman, armed with only his mere hunting rifle, knife, or tomahawk, to flee as they had at Camden. As the 63rd started their advance, Clark and his militia realized they would not make it behind them in time, and so Clark and his men stopped and continued to hide until they could decide what to do next. Just as Tarleton and Money had hoped, the Patriot militia caught sight of the bayonets, and the Patriots turned and ran. As Tarleton and Money were probably proud of their achievement, the realization that the 63rd had advanced too far down the hill came much too late. Every Patriot militiaman atop the ridge was at that time primed and poised to make the long shot and destroy the 63rd. With no time to retreat, bullets rained down on the 63rd from every direction. It was at that time that Lieutenant Money fell wounded, after which all of the other British officers in the 63rd were picked off. Tarleton watched as the 63rd were being shot to pieces, trapped by bullet fire. Perhaps it was during this time that Tarleton felt obligated to try and help his fellow fallen British soldier. Alternatively, Tarleton may have felt guilty for continuing to order the advance, or he may have felt the need to save the 63rd, as he did not want to be blamed for losing an entire regiment. I have also heard it said that Tarleton was broken-hearted after seeing Money fall, as he and everyone else loved him. Regardless of the reason, Tarleton then ordered his British dragoons down the lane towards Sumter and the Patriots. As the cavalry galloped down the lane bordered on either side by high fences, they were funneled onto the field. At this time, the Patriot forces fired so continually, both horse and man fell on top of each other. After many volleys, there was a pile of dead dragoons and their horses. However, Tarleton continued to force a charge until the dead dragoons formed an almost impassable wall. Some of the dragoons rode through the woods and were able to emerge safely at the far side base of Monument Hill. These dragoons then were able to push some of the patriots back towards the Blackstock home. After this, some dragoons finally made it in front of the 63rd and used their bodies and their horses as a shield. Even Tartlton bravely charged through the open field towards the fallen Lieutenant Money. As many rifles took aim at Tartlton, upon reaching Money, he quickly dismounted, tossed Money on the back of his horse, remounted, and fled the scene. However, this was in vain, as Lieutenant Money would later die from his wounds. As Tartlton retreated down the lane, most of the 63rd followed. During this, Tarleton's man, Lieutenant Skinner, and some of his dragoons, as well as some of the more fortunate 63rd, provided cover fire for their comrades to escape. In addition, some of the British dragoons found themselves beyond Monument Hill, fighting near the Blackstock house. This is when Wynne and his men, who Sumter had hidden in the trees on the Patriot Ridge, emerged. This caused the entire enemy force to retreat down the lane. During the chaos of what was the Battle of Blackstock, Elijah Clark and his militia, who had found themselves finally behind the enemy lines while trying to sneak behind the 63rd, ended up finding the 63rd's horses. As Clark and his militiamen started stealing the horses, they looked up to see Tartlton and the entire British force in retreat and barreling towards them. Upon seeing this, they took as many horses as they could and scattered the rest before galloping as fast as they could in front of the enemy. Sumter then ordered the Patriot militia to chase after the fleeing enemy. As this was happening, Sumter and his men stayed atop their ridge nearest to the road to watch the going-ons. Then, unexpectedly, a loud sound of gunfire came their way as some of the non-fleeing 63rd soldiers let loose a volley. As Sumter was turning away from the sound, one ball traveled deep into his shoulder and was lodged against his spine. At this, Sumter did not say a word nor scream. Rather, his arm fell and he dropped his sword. In addition, blood began to pour down. One of Sumter's officers then retrieved the sword, placed it in the scabbard, and escorted Sumter to the Blackstock house, where luckily a doctor was able to successfully dig out the bullet. After Sumter's injury, command then went to Colonel Twiggs of Georgia. At this, the Patriot militia stopped on top of the once British-occupied ridge and watched as Tartlton and his men continued to retreat. Upon the enemy disappearing, the victorious Patriots began taking the wounded to the house for treatment. Twigg, knowing that the British would be back in the morning with the Grasshopper and more men, decided to have the Patriot militia build large campfires at the plantation, after which everyone would cross the Tiger River, scatter, and flee to safety. In addition, after Sumter's surgery, a cow was killed and skinned, and a stretcher made and tied between two horses so Sumter could be taken to safety to heal. Eventually, upon traveling 5 to 6 miles away from the Blackstock plantation, Tartlton and his retreating men ran into the infantry and their Grasshopper. However, by this time it was so late, Tartlton decided to stop and make camp for the night. Interestingly, Elijah Clark and his men, upon trying to make their way back to the plantation, saw the fires of the British and skirted so far around their encampment that they had to cross the Tiger River. This caused them not to arrive to the plantation until the next day, when all the other patriots had already gone. Later that following day, Tartlton too arrived to the plantation with his men, only to make the same discovery. Upon this discovery, Tartlton sent for the 71st Regiment, which were awaiting his orders at the nearby ferry with supplies. When the 71st finally arrived at the battlefield, it was a soldier by the name of MacDonald who drew a picture of the battlefield and the landscape that had aided in the death of 1/3 of the 63rd Regiment. MacDonald's sketch was then sent with a letter from Tartlton claiming victory to Cornwallis. Because of Tarleton's letter, the true victor of the Battle of Blackstock is still up for debate even today. Tartlton justified his belief that the British won, as the patriots had snuck away during the night, and he held the field the following day. However, Sumter claimed the victory as only 3 patriots were killed and only between 4 to 12 wounded. The British, on the other hand, lost between 90 to 100 men and 30 horses before being driven from the field. In the aftermath of the Battle of Blackstock, Tartlton took some of his dragoons to hunt down the patriot militia. While doing so, Tartlton and his men also preyed on locals who, in reality, probably did not participate in the battle. During Tarleton's aggressive search for Sumter, he did happen to come across the home of Elijah Clark's man, William Hodge. While on the Hodge property, Tartlton saw the Whig scout Jack Beckham sitting on his horse eating breakfast near the house in an open window. Upon seeing Tartlton, Beckham dashed away. Having failed to capture Beckham, William Hodge was arrested. All the food was taken, animals killed, and the house, buildings, and even fences burnt to the ground. Tartlton even told Mrs. Hodge that he would hang her husband. However, this never occurred. But Tartlton did have Mr. Hodge sent to Camden as a POW. While at Camden, Mr. Hodge would almost starve until 1781 when he and another POW escaped. While some believe that Mr. William Hodge did not serve at Cowpens, it is a fact that his son Samuel did. This is most interesting to me, as I am a descendant of Mr. Hodge. While Tartlton did fulfill his objective, as Sumter was injured and the militia scattered, Cornwallis found the Battle of Blackstock too costly, as money and many other regular soldiers and their horses were lost. As a result, Cornwallis discontinued the use of mounted infantry. On the Patriot side, the Battle of Blackstock resulted in Sumter not being able to participate in the next major battle, the Battle of Cowpens. As a result, Daniel Morgan and Andrew Pickens, who worked much better together, were able to lead the Patriots to victory. Furthermore, during the Battle of Cowpens, when Tartlton once again tried to force a charge, his dragoons refused, as the memory of the Battle of Blackstock was still heavy on their minds. In regards to the Palmetto Trail is one of the 16 cross-state trails in the United States. It was established in 1994 and at 500 miles is the longest trail in South Carolina. The trail runs from Walhalla in the Blue Ridge Mountains all the way to Allendale on the Intercoastal Waterway. While on this mountain-to-sea trail, you will pass by various mountains, lakes, forests, and swamps. In addition, this free trail connects urban and rural locations of the state by using county parks, national forests, nature preserves, wildlife management areas, Revolutionary War battlefields, and Native American paths. This is accomplished by utilizing rails to trails, greenways, city sidewalks, urban bikeways, and marked protected lands. The Palmetto Trail is truly unique as it takes travelers from the remote mountain forest to the steps of the state capitol and to the state's beloved low country. I also want to mention that the trail was made for all ages and abilities and offers 26 sections of varying difficulty and lengths that range from 1.3 miles to 47 miles. While some people take a month or more to hike the Palmetto Trail in its entirety, because of life's obligations and having small children, we chose to start section hiking the trail by doing 2 to 3 hikes a year. In the upstate of South Carolina, there are 18 sections. We chose the Blackstock Battlefield passage as our first section because it is considered easy and only 1.3 miles. In addition, this made for a great fall hike as hunting is not allowed in the area. The Blackstock Battlefield Passage is a nature trail that runs along a remote section of the Tiger River. Furthermore, besides being the location of the Revolutionary Battle on November the 20th of 1780, the trail highlights the region's plants and animal life. While on this trail, we had a wonderful time. However, if you plan on coming here, you should be aware of the following. There is no camping or motorized vehicles allowed. During the summer, there are an abundance of bothersome gnats. The trail does have some steep areas, making it easy to fall. There are also some drop-off areas near the river, so be very careful. The battlefield does have a lot of ant mounds. And finally, and probably most importantly, the field area has many holes. I was told this occurred because, while trying to recreate the battlefield, trees were cut and covered up by dirt. And now that the stumps have decayed, large holes are a result. In conclusion, I hope this vlog inspires you to visit the Blackstock Battlefield or the Palmetto Trail, as its passages reveal the rich diversity and fascinating history, culture, and geography of the Palmetto State. This boy that I know. I'm gonna get him because I love him so.
It's minute. It's minute.
Yeah.
It's minute.
It's so special.
Cheese. Cheese.
Cheese, thank you. Carl, Millard.
My son.
Okay, give it to me.
My son.
Yeah. You got. Thank you, Carl.
My son. My son.
Millard, get out of his stroller. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. And as always, thanks for watching.